The restaurant was one of those places where the silverware didn't just shine, it glowed. Crystal glasses lined the tables, and wine bottles rested in polished oak cabinets like museum pieces. Soft jazz drifted through the air, and chandeliers cast golden light that made everything look more expensive than it actually was. Amara Lewis moved through the room with effortless grace, a tray balanced in her hand. She was in her mid-20s, tall, poised, with eyes that noticed everything. She didn't rush, she didn't stumble, she didn't look flustered. She worked with quiet precision, the kind that came from sharp observation and deep patience. Most customers barely looked at her. To them, she was a uniform, a role, a background piece to their evening. But Amara was not someone who blended into the background. She simply allowed people to assume what they wished. That's where the story began. At table 12 sat Richard Calloway, CEO of a global manufacturing firm. He wore a navy suit that could pay someone's rent for months. His voice was the kind that filled a room even when he wasn't trying to, full of ease and confidence. Across from him sat two business clients from Beijing, Mr. Chen and Ms. Zhou, both impeccably dressed, both polite, both speaking softly to one another in Mandarin as they reviewed a contract. Richard didn't understand a word, but he pretended to. Amara approached the table. "Good evening. May I take your drink orders?" Richard didn't look at her at first, just flicked his eyes up with a half smile, the kind that came from a lifetime of power. "Yes, sweetheart. Just give us a moment," he said, dismissing her with a slight wave. Amara nodded, expression steady, and stepped back. He leaned forward, whispering to his clients with exaggerated gestures, as though volume could replace comprehension. Mr. Chen smiled politely, the polite smile of someone trying not to appear rude, and Ms. Zhou nodded, though her eyes flickered with discomfort. Amara's brow softened, not with pity, but recognition. Then Richard laughed loudly and said something that silenced the table. "You know, we had a waitress here last month who tried greeting you in Chinese. Adorable. Absolutely butchered the language. I told her she should stick to her job." Mr. Chen and Ms. Zhou exchanged a brief look, stiff, embarrassed. Richard leaned back, smug. Amara stepped forward again. "Are you ready to order now?" Richard looked at her, and this time really looking, and smirked. "Unless you speak Chinese, sweetheart," he said. "Then maybe you can help us out?" The joke landed like a stone. The clients were now fully silent. Amara paused, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she was choosing how to say it. Then, she set her tray down gently, hands calm, posture unbending, voice soft enough not to perform, but clear enough that every word landed. "Nin shuyao wo bang nin fanyi ma?" Do you need me to help translate? Richard froze. Mr. Chen's eyes widened. Ms. Zhou's hand flew to her mouth in surprise. Amara continued, fluid, precise, elegant. Not stiffly learned, but lived. Her pronunciation was flawless. And Richard had no idea what she had just said. He stared at her as if the world had tilted sideways. Amara waited, steady and unshaken. And then Ms. Zhou spoke. Not to Richard, but to Amara. In Mandarin. And Amara answered, easily. Richard's mouth parted, stunned. The restaurant around them grew quieter, just a little, the way rooms do when something unexpected shifts the air. No one had placed a bet yet, but humiliation had already started forming. The table remained frozen for a moment, suspended between disbelief and something heavier. Richard blinked twice, the easy arrogance in his expression cracking like thin ice under unexpected weight. The clients were no longer looking at him at all. Their attention was fully on Amara now, respectful, relieved, grateful even. Richard couldn't allow that. His ego was a house built on being the most impressive person in the room. And right now, the floor was shifting under him. He forced a laugh, too loud, too sharp. "Well now," he said, adjusting his cufflinks, though they didn't need adjusting. "Looks like we've got a talented one." Amara didn't react. She had seen this type of laughter before, the kind that tried to reassert control. Mr. Chen spoke gently in Mandarin. "Your accent is beautiful. Where did you learn?" Amara answered with ease. "Kenya first, then Singapore, then Xi'an. My father worked in international education." Before Mr. Chen could respond, Richard broke in. No, no, hold on. Anyone can memorize a few phrases. That doesn't make her fluent. The client's expressions cooled. They exchanged the kind of polite stillness that meant deep disapproval. Amar held eye contact with Richard. Not challenging, simply present. He leaned back, voice rising so diners at nearby tables could hear. In fact, I'll make this interesting. Ava, the hostess, overheard and stiffened, recognizing the spark of something ugly. Richard smiled, a smile that never touched his eyes. I'll bet $500,000, he paused for effect, letting the number settle over the room, that she can't carry a real, sustained conversation in Chinese about business terms. Actual negotiation language, not tourist greetings. Gasps moved through the restaurant like a breeze. Not because of the money, though the money was absurd, but because of the disrespect. Ms. Zhou's jaw tightened. Mr. Chen's posture sharpened. They were being used as props in someone else's pride game. Again. Amara's expression didn't change. She didn't flinch, didn't bristle, didn't look irritated or intimidated. She simply set her tray down fully, folding her hands in front of her, posture relaxed, voice soft, but unmistakably firm. If I win, she said, you apologize. Not to me, to them. She nodded gently to the clients. In the language they speak. The table went dead silent. Richard's eyebrows rose. You think you can make me look like a fool? He scoffed. Amara didn't blink. I think you're doing that already. The audacity wasn't loud, and it was quiet, and that made it hit harder. A few diners actually choked on laughter they tried to suppress. Richard's face changed, red at the edges, then pale beneath it, anger and embarrassment twisting together. Fine, he snapped. Deal. He didn't realize, not yet, that he had already lost. He didn't see the confidence in her posture wasn't bluff. He didn't know she didn't speak just one or two languages. He had no idea who he had just challenged. Amara finally turned to the clients and switched languages again. Not Mandarin this time, but flawless Cantonese. Mr. Chen's eyes widened. Ms. Zhou's hand covered her heart. Then, without missing a beat, she shifted to Japanese, then French, then Swahili. The sound of the room falling into silence was louder than any applause could have been. She ended in English. You don't know me, she said quietly to Richard. You only assumed I was less. The clients looked at her with genuine admiration. Richard looked at her, finally, like he was seeing a person instead of a uniform. And for the first time that evening, he had no words. The restaurant returned to motion slowly, like a clock restarting after someone had held the gears too tight. Plates clinked. Silverware touched glass. But the atmosphere wasn't the same. People were not eating anymore. They were listening, even those who pretended not to. Mr. Chen leaned forward, eyes warm with curiosity. 7 languages? That is not coincidence. Amara smiled faintly. It isn't. And she began, not as a performance, not loud, not dramatic, simply as a truth. My father taught at international schools. We moved every 2 years. Nairobi, Lagos, Singapore, Beijing, Montreal, Seoul, Lisbon. I learned the languages around me because I wanted to talk to people, not just nod at them, understand them. Her tone was even, almost gentle. She continued. When we moved to China, I was 12. I didn't know a word. The kids laughed when I tried to speak. I went home every night and practiced until my tongue hurt. She smiled, not bitter, just remembering. My mother said, if they do not open the door, become the person who builds keys. I have been building keys ever since. Mr. Chen nodded slowly, deeply. That is not just language, he said. That is discipline. Ms. Zhou added, and heart. Richard listened, because now he had to. The air allowed no escape. He had expected a waitress who got lucky with pronunciation, someone who memorized phrases like decorative jewelry. Instead, he was looking at someone who had traveled the world, absorbed it, and held it without needing to prove it to anyone. But there was one more truth. Amara's voice softened, not with sadness, but with clarity. When we moved back to the States, I learned something else. People don't see what you can do. They see what they think you should be able to do. No one moved. So I learned to let them underestimate me. A small, calm breath. It makes their surprise quieter. And my victories louder. The line didn't land like a punch. It landed like a truth that had been waiting for a room to speak in. The restaurant was silent, not tense, just listening. Richard shifted, but this time his ego had nowhere to stand. He tried to find irony, humor, superiority, all the old roots, but they were gone. The room no longer supported them. His clients were impressed, and they no longer looked to him for direction. For the first time in the entire dinner, Richard was not the center, and he knew it. Amara did not gloat. She did not raise her chin. She did not enjoy his discomfort. She simply existed without apology. That was the part that humbled him most. Richard adjusted his jacket again, though his hands weren't steady this time. His smile returned, but now it had cracks in it. Too tight at the corners, too bright in the eyes, the smile of a man trying to control a situation that already slipped out of his grasp. Well, he said lightly, almost joking, isn't that impressive? 7 languages. Quite the party trick. A few nearby tables went still. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't hear in his own voice. Desperation. Mrs. Joe slowly set her chopsticks down. Her expression had changed. No longer polite neutrality, but something sharper, clearer. A woman who was done allowing her dignity to be set aside for the comfort of someone else. It is not a trick, she said in English, her tone even and precise. It is education, discipline, culture. Richard blinked, caught off guard. Clients rarely corrected him. Mr. Chen continued, his voice quiet but pointed, the calm that feels sharper than shouting. And it is respect, something that has been missing from this table. The words landed, softly, but they landed. Richard laughed again, but there was no one to laugh with him. He turned to Amara, reaching for charm he no longer possessed. You could have said something earlier, he said. No need to make a spectacle of things. Amara tilted her head slightly. I didn't make a spectacle, she replied. You made a bet. Silence swept the room like a curtain being drawn. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because the truth didn't need volume. It needed only accuracy. Amara continued, her tone gentle, almost kind, which made the moment sharper. You asked if I could speak Chinese. I answered. You asked if I could negotiate. I did. You asked if I understood business terms. She glanced toward Mr. Chen and Ms. Zhou, who nodded, firm, proud acknowledgement. And I did. Richard swallowed, hard. The room was still watching, not hostile, just witnessing. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't move closer. She didn't posture. She simply reminded him of the rules he set. You owe them an apology, she said softly. Every conversation in the restaurant stopped. Not because it was dramatic, but because everyone knew this was the moment. Richard's jaw tightened. His pride tried to speak, tried to protect itself. But there are moments when a person realizes the room no longer believes the version of themselves they're trying to sell. This was that moment. Richard looked at Mr. Chen, at Ms. Zhou, then, slowly, at Amara. And the fight left his shoulders. Not all of it, but enough. He nodded once, stared down at the table, then said in a voice stripped of performance, I'm sorry. He didn't look up. He didn't need to be forced lower. That was real enough. Mr. Chen gave a small, respectful nod. Ms. Zhou breathed out, tension easing from her posture, and the room exhaled with them. Amara simply picked up her tray, with the same calm she'd had from the beginning, and asked, as if the evening had just begun, Would you like dessert menus now? A few people laughed under their breath, not at Richard, but at the quiet grace in how she closed the moment. Power didn't shift because someone won. It shifted because someone stood without needing to raise their voice. The night moved on, but something in the room had permanently shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for everyone to notice the difference in the air, like a tense string finally loosening. Mr. Chen and Ms. Zhou stayed longer than planned. They didn't speak about business anymore. They spoke about travel, childhood memories, favorite city street foods, and they spoke to Amara, not as staff, but as someone with a seat at their table. Amara didn't hover. She didn't try to claim the attention she had earned. She simply continued her work, steady, composed, gracious. But now, the room saw her, really saw her. They greeted her with warmth. They thanked her sincerely. They lifted their eyes when she approached. Respect didn't come as applause. It came as recognition. Meanwhile, Richard remained very still. He stayed seated long after dinner was finished, staring at the untouched last few sips of his wine. He looked smaller now, not physically, but in the way a person looks when they finally see themselves honestly. Everyone leaves moments like this differently. Some get defensive, some get angry, some hide. But Richard did something rarer. He listened, not to the room, not to the whispers, but to the silence inside himself. The one that only comes when ego steps aside. At the end of the night, he stood up, slowly, reluctantly, and approached Amara. Not with charm, not with authority, with something closer to sincerity. "I was wrong," he said, voice low, not performative. "Not just about you, about the way I see people. I thought power meant being the most impressive person in the room." He paused, searching for words he had never used before. But today, power looked like grace. Amara didn't smile to ease his discomfort. She didn't offer a comforting phrase. She let the truth sit where it belonged. "You learned something today," she said. "That's worth more than the bet." Richard exhaled, a slow breath of a man who had needed to hear that permission. "Do you consult?" he asked carefully. "Languages, cultural communication? My company does a lot of global work. We've clearly been lacking perspective." Amara considered him for a quiet moment. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." He nodded, a real nod. Not the theatrical kind. "Then I'd like to hire you." Not charity, not guilt, not repayment. Recognition of value. Mr. Chen and Ms. Cho exchanged small, knowing smiles. The story didn't end with revenge. It didn't end with humiliation. It ended with alignment. When the night closed and chairs were stacked and the jazz slipped to silence, Amara stepped outside the restaurant. The air was cool. Streetlights hummed softly. Cars passed in the distance. She didn't grin with triumph. She didn't replay the moment. She didn't need to, because her life had not changed tonight. The world around her had simply adjusted to match the truth she already lived. She walked home with steady steps, calm, unapologetic, whole.